if you don't know me, my name's Kyle Loomis. I'm student ministries here. A few weeks ago, Phil and Josh texted me, 7 or 8 weeks ago. Phil's like, hey Kyle, March 12th, can you preach? And I was like, it's been a while. There's been a few opportunities that I have skillfully avoided because it's a little stressful. But I'm like, I got a full month and a half to prepare. I don't need to stress about it. Yes, I will preach. What's the message? And he's like, Matthew 5, adultery and lust. And I said, can I have another passage? And he said, sorry, that's just the way the schedule falls. And I said, sorry, find someone else then. And then he goes, I think it'd be good for the church, for the youth pastor to speak on this topic to the church. And I was like, what does that mean? What's the correlation there, Phil? I don't understand. We were just messing with each other, of course, and I'm very excited to be able to speak on this topic. But I bring that up because, for one, the kids, if they haven't already made their way out, the kids who usually make their way out to children's ministry, you guys are dismissed. But as parents, if you are not sure what kind of car ride conversations you want to have on the way home, maybe you can kind of connect with your spouse a little bit and decide if you'd like for them to be here. My son's 9, he's staying. I will not be inappropriate or gruesome or anything like that, but if you want to explain what adultery is, cool. If you don't, then maybe they should go to the kids ministry, whatever. But yeah, I've been going to this church since 2000, and I've been on staff for 12 years now, and I love this church, and I love this opportunity to come and to speak to the kind of the greater population, not just the focused population of students. But with students, I like to, have lots of visual things. So I'll start off by saying my family of origin, like my mom, my dad, my brother, we have some weird Christmas traditions, mostly with Christmas gifts. Between my dad and my brother, they try and find each other the ugliest gift that they can find. So we're talking like a coconut with a monkey carved into it, or a cat statue. I don't know if this is just part of the folklore. I think that this actually happened though, but I can't remember. A dead fish nailed to a board, wrapped in a Christmas gift and given. It's weird stuff, right, that they do, but I think they've actually moved on from that. They're like, we're wasting money on really ugly things. So they've moved on from that. My thing is I will not wrap a gift in any fashion that you can tell what the gift is before you open it. And I know like a lot of people do that, but I do weird things like take a pair of earrings and put them in like the whole tube of like wrapping paper and tape the ends. And it's like, what did you get me, a fishing pole? They open it, earrings, why? Why did you do that? One time I took wood and I made a wooden box around my gift, and I nailed it shut and gave it. I was like, cool, you made me a box. I was like, no, that's the wrapping paper. How am I supposed to get it out? You're welcome. I don't know. So that's my weird thing. But my brother always gets me gifts that are dangerous. So he always, and he's a good gift giver, and I'm not. So I feel like he gets gypped, but I get awesome stuff. So he'll get me like throwing axes that stick into like the wood, and like retractable police batons in case they need to hit anything. But one thing that he got me that I love, like this is one of my favorite possessions that I actually own. I thought I lost it the other day, and I was so devastated. And it's this awesome machete thing. I think it's actually called a kukuri, but it's so cool. And Grayson and I were walking around in the woods behind our house, and I'm just like hitting anything that's in my way. And the 9-year-old goes, Dad, why do you have to hit everything when we're in the woods together? And I'm like, because this thing is awesome. And it's so fun. I've used this to cut through lots of trails. I cut down, actually Grayson started it. He cut down a palm tree, like an 8-inch wide palm tree, just whacking through it. But part of what makes it awesome is the sound that it makes. I don't know if it's the curve or like whatever it is, but this thing like thwacks. And it's so awesome, I wanted to share the sound effect with you. So I have prepared, I found this log. Okay, so some of you right now are like, I can't wait to hear that thing. I'm gonna try after service. Some of you are like, why are you so weird? I don't know, I can't explain it, but like, just listen. Ooh, I love it. I don't know, like It's just such a satisfying sound. No, it's like way better when it's an actual tree and it just thwacks and it sticks there. But I just thought it was a really cool way to start the sermon today, to involve different parts of your brain and get the creative side rolling. And we're starting with a sound effect. So I'm not going to put my hand there. So just one last time, just let it ring out and let it stick in your mind. Whack. Thanks. I do my best work with a machete in my hands. The title of the sermon today is A Reasonable Response. But the longer title of the sermon might help you to connect that sound, which I'm not going to talk about that anymore. I'm just going to leave it there, and you can look at it or remember it all that you want, but I don't want to be too gruesome. But the longer title is Radical Amputation is a Reasonable Response to Sin. I'm going to read the passage this morning here. Matthew 5:27. You have heard it said, do not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown in hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. So let's just start off with this observation here. A lot of times when we read something that Jesus says and it doesn't kind of fit with our personal lifestyle, we like to say like, oh, that's not really what Jesus meant. And then we tame it down to where it really meant nothing and it requires nothing of us, right? We like to dismiss the words of Christ that are intrusive and that are uncomfortable and say culturally, biblically, language, it didn't actually mean that. But Jesus was not promoting self-mutilation to start off with. He wasn't suggesting to his disciples, hey, lop off arms and pluck out eyeballs. If he was, there would probably be some handless disciples along the way, right? Like, they would, if that's really what he was trying to get across, Peter would have been like, Jesus, I cut both my arms off for you. And he'd be like, you're still missing the point, man. But he's not promoting self-mutilation. He's not suggesting that you remove your body parts, but it's hyperbole, it's an exaggeration, but it's supposed to get our attention. And it's supposed to be a way for us to see our relationship with sin and what our relationship with sin should be like. So this morning we're going to go through like 4 observations on the text. I mean, it's there, it's pretty short, you see the whole thing, you know where this is going, you've heard it before. But I want to walk through 4 observations and make some notes along the way and hopefully lead towards some application where you don't leave this room without doing something. Not that thing, but without doing something before you leave today, okay? So the first observation, quite simple, we need Jesus. We need Jesus. This whole passage, the whole Sermon on the Mount is talking about what kingdom life is like and what the ethic of the kingdom is and the rules for those who follow Jesus, right? And in just a few passages back, Jesus says, I have come to fulfill the law. I'm the only one who can do this. If your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you've got to be really, really good in order to be perfect enough to be with God, but really, none of us can be that good. So when Jesus starts off this passage, you have heard it said, don't commit adultery. This would have been spoken into a culture that had emphasized outward conformity, right? Like, you see Jesus confronting the religious leaders all the time, like you are whitewashed tombs. You look good on the outside, but on the inside there's a problem. And Jesus is not raising the bar here. He's not saying, if you want to follow me, I'm going to make it extra hard, but he's telling us you'll never be good enough. The Pharisees might have kind of put off this feel, okay, all of you little lowly folks, if you want to be good, you got to be like me. Try harder so you can be like me. But Jesus is like, no matter how hard you try, you can never be good enough. And that's why I came. That's why I'm here. So when Jesus speaks on these things that seem really hard for us and are really convicting, it's actually really gracious. Because he's not allowing us to have this false righteousness, like, well, I followed all of your rules, God, and I've checked every box, so that means I'm good enough. That means I don't really need you because I'm good enough. But Jesus is like, no matter how hard you try, you'll never be good enough. And him revealing that is grace. If he stopped there, that would have been pretty cruel, like, haha, you're not good enough. But it's you're not good enough, and that's why I came. That's why I'm inviting you into relationship with me, because I'm the one who's righteous. I'm the one who fulfills all these righteous requirements of the law. And in me, you can be made right with God. And through some surveys and different things, people have kind of noticed we all respond differently to our relationship with God. Like there's different learning styles, there's different kind of personality types, but some surveys kind of suggest like about 20% of people like just beat themselves up all of the time, right? And you hear a sermon about radical amputation and taking drastic measures to eliminate sin from your life, and there might be some people who are like, I just am so bad, and I've got so much baggage, I've got so much sin, and how could God ever love me? But for you, like this first point, like you can leave after this, and that'll be totally fine. If that's you, if you're the one who beats yourself up, this is the point you need. We need Jesus, and you need Jesus. And no matter what your life looks like on the outside, or how good you are, or how not good you are, how good you think you are, whatever, we need Jesus. We all need Jesus, right? And we all need to cling to him. See, some people, when they hear about like actually living out the gospel, it tends them to feel bad, and then it leads towards shame. Okay, what's shame cause? Shame causes us to hide from God. And that's what Adam and Eve did in the garden. They realized, oh no, we're naked, we've sinned, so they ran from God. And if you leave, church on a Sunday morning feeling nothing but shame, it's probably going to lead you to run further from God, right? Like you're not going to want to move towards him. You're going to move away from him because you're afraid and you're hiding. But he came. We need him. And he invites us into relationship with him. So don't be overcome with shame. Conviction is different. Conviction is okay because conviction leads us back to God. It draws us back into loving relationships. So it's not just about ignoring your feelings, but I don't want anybody to feel shameful because of things that have happened in their past, because this whole passage is about Jesus inviting us in and close to him. That's the point. He wants to restore us, and he wants to draw us near in relationship. So just as a way to start off, don't leave filled with shame, but if God brings conviction, respond to it in simple obedience. That's the sermon series, and that's what we're after, simple obedience, and that's what he's after. Secondly, second observation, Jesus is concerned with the condition of our heart. Jesus is concerned with the condition of our heart. And when Phil mentioned last week, there are 6 you have heard that it was said statements, and I believe those will come up here on the board, but you have heard it said, about murder, you've heard it said about adultery, you've heard it said about divorce, oaths, eye for an eye, love for enemies, and in every situation, Jesus is revealing the inward wickedness. He's revealing the pre-existing wickedness that's already in us. So some people look at these 6 things and say, Jesus is raising the bar, In the Old Testament, all you had to do is not murder. But now you're not even allowed to get angry, as if he's moving the target of righteousness. But really, he's not moving the target. The target has been the same, and his intention has been the same. Our hearts should be devoted to him, right? So, just like nobody's accidentally had an affair, right? There are things that happen before you murder somebody, right? Like when we see like a mass killing or something like that, or a mass shooting, the news will find out who was this monster that did this terrible thing, but then they'll always point to their past, right? And say, oh, they got arrested for killing animals, or they they read all of these weird books and they had all these strange internet searches, and they'll look at their past and be like, yeah, there was a lot of things leading up to this moment when they finally murdered somebody. And God, or when Jesus is pointing these things out to us, is kind of acknowledging the reality. Murder doesn't just happen, from last week. Like, something leads to it, and it's a long, steady, progressive movement towards deeper and deeper sin, right? And when we're dealing with the topic of adultery, like I said, nobody's ever accidentally had an affair. Okay, so what's the timeline of an affair, right? Well, how about this? Would anybody be okay with their spouse having an affair? No. Great. Okay, you're normal. Congratulations. No healthy, normal person would be okay with that. It's an exclusive relationship, a covenant, an agreement that we are each other's and only each other's, right? But imagine this scenario. Imagine ladies, your husband, he's at work, and then this new, young, attractive woman moves into the area, and her office is just a few offices down. So your husband welcomes her. Hey, here's some coffee. Just want to welcome you on behalf of the team. We're so glad you're here. But then he does that like every day for a month. And those little coffee drop-offs end up kind of him sitting on the desk and talking, how you doing, how you feeling, how you connecting? We just want to welcome you. And then all of a sudden it becomes, hey, we're going out to lunch. You want to join us? And then it becomes she's asking him, hey, let's go get some tacos. Well, I want tacos. Who's going? I didn't ask anybody, just the two of us. Well, I'm really hungry, so let's go. And then those midday lunch meetings turn into, honey, I can't come home. I got to work late, and it's just the two of them working in the office. And then it's, honey, I can't come home for dinner. I got to work through, and we're going out with some people from work. And by some people, you mean that one person, that lady who's young and attractive and has this relationship with you. And then the man and the woman are at a restaurant, and they're drinking wine, and she's flirting, and she opens up about her insecurities and how she just wonders if anybody could ever love her, and he's reassuring her, you're beautiful, you're gorgeous, of course, somebody would be lucky to have you. And then she asks one time, hey, why don't you come on by and pick me up? My car's in the shop, I could really use a lift. Why don't you come inside? And then they sit on the couch, and she slips into something more comfortable instead of work clothes. Like, imagine if that was the scenario, and the wife found out that this had been happening for weeks and months on end, and she didn't know about it. The moment she finds out, what's she going to do? She's going to be upset, right? There will be some spirited fellowship between that couple at that point. And she would be like, I can't believe you've done this. Like, how long has this been going on? What have you been thinking? You've been fostering this relationship, and you've been moving one step over the course of days and weeks and months, ever and ever and ever closer to this betrayal. And then imagine the husband would say, whoa, honey, hold on a second. Seems that you're upset. But I just want to remind you, I didn't actually have sex with her. Like, in that moment, would anybody be like, oh, that's true, good point, you're not allowed to be mad? No, everybody in this room would disagree that the husband is an idiot. It's like, no, it doesn't matter if you didn't cross the last line, you crossed 1,000 lines leading up to that moment, right? It would be normal and understandable for that wife to feel rejected, to feel betrayed by her husband because of every step that he took on the way to get there. And you could reverse that role, and men, your wife, whatever the situation is. But we would be upset because all of those things are a transgression in the relationship. All of those things would cause tension and divide between husband and wife, even if they never actually slept together, right? Because all of that is leading towards something, and all of that in and of itself is wrong. So when Jesus says, you've heard it said, do not commit adultery, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. We understand that adultery isn't the line where sin starts. It starts far beyond that, and much earlier along in that movement, that timeline. That's where the sin starts. And if a wife would be right to be upset about the husband's transgressions all along the way, then isn't our God, who describes his relationship with us as a covenant marriage, wouldn't it be right for him to be upset for him to say, you have broken relationship, you have transgressed, you have sinned against me, if our sin, even if we don't check the box that's at the very end, if our sin is leading us towards that, I don't think many people in this room would try to use that line, hey, we didn't actually sleep together, so everything's cool. But we try that with God, right? You know, there's like some line that we have in our minds, and as long as we don't cross that line, we're okay. And usually that line is anything that someone else can see. Therefore, anything that's only happening in my mind is okay, because it doesn't affect anything. If I'm not acting upon what is happening in my mind, then whatever, it's not a big deal. Well, obviously that's not true. Last week, if you hate your brother, you've committed adultery. This week, if you've lusted after that person, if you hate that person, you've committed murder. If you've lusted after that person, you've committed adultery. The sin starts in our mind. And God is right to say it's not just about outward conformity, but it's about that inward simple obedience. So not only are there 6 you have heard it said passages, but then there's 7 more do not passages. You know, do not fast and look miserable. Do not give your money in a way that everybody can see. Do not pray out loud so everybody can hear you, right? Because in both of these long lists, over and over and over again, what Jesus is getting to is, it's not about outward conformity. I'm after your heart. That's what I want from you. I want your heart to love me. I want you to know me fully and to be in relationship with me. And all of these outward signs only fool mankind. You know, you look like you're righteous, but God sees through that and he sees the intentions of our heart, and that's what he wants. He wants our intentions to be pure. He doesn't just want us to avoid the big, bad 10 Commandment sins, but the sins that happen in our heart that maybe nobody else can see, because those things negatively impact our relationship. A third observation is that Jesus gives us a cost analysis. So this is kind of going down to the second part when he starts talking about plucking off eyeballs and stuff like that. Okay, so we're going to do some math now. I'm not really good at math. I'm just going to throw that out there. I think this is true, but do the math in your head. Check it yourself. X minus 1 is greater than X minus 10. So choose a number for X, put it in both sides of the equation, work it out. Is this right? Okay. Does it work for negative numbers too? Because I don't know how that works. Does it? Like if it was -1, X is negative, does it work? Teachers? Okay, cool, thanks. I see 2 really confident people. Yes, you're embarrassing me, Kyle. Yes. Okay, so if you were in a business and you're like, oh shoot, we're losing money, there's no way to avoid it. Would we rather lose $1 or 10? Would we rather lose 1% or 10%? It would be better for the business to lose less, right? Okay, so Jesus kind of, if you use like X's and numbers, it's algebra. But if you use words in this same equation, it's logic. I'm pretty sure that's how that works. So Jesus' logic on this, next slide, is that an arm or an eye, losing that would be greater than, better off for you than being separated from God. Okay? So I think that this happens both pre-salvation and post-salvation. So somebody who covets their sin and never lays that up before God, never seeks forgiveness for those things, and lives their whole life rejecting God and loving their sin, the separation from God for them is eternal. You know, and Jesus said it'd be better for you to lose a body part than go into hell. But that doesn't mean that this logic is thrown out the window if you are already a believer, I think. And I think the main evidence for that is just our own personal experience, right? If you got in a fight with your kids on the way to church today, or your spouse, when you walked in and Cameron said, I'd like to invite you to worship, was your first thought like, I just can't wait to just open my heart to the Lord and just commune with him and just praise him for his glory? No, you're like, my kid's an idiot, right? And I can't believe my husband is so thick-skulled. Like, why does he have to bring that stuff up? And why are we having this same conversation again? Like, our sin prevents, like it hinders our relationship with God experientially, right? Like all of us have been there, it's time to pray. I just can't. Like I can because God says I can, but like my heart is just not there. I can't focus on my time with the Lord. Last week, Phil's passage revealed that our sin, even as those people who have a relationship with Jesus, who've been covered by the blood and forgiven, our sin still interrupts our relationship with God. Leave your gift at the altar and go and reconcile with your brother. That sacrifice would have been a communion with God. It would have been an interaction with God. And Jesus says, leave it and go take care of that sin. So our sin hinders our relationship with God, and the cost analysis is if something is threatening your relationship with God, you'd be better off to eliminate it entirely. You'd be so much better off to lose that thing. Now, in the culture, the right eye, the right hand had a position of prominence. Like for most people, the dominant hand. Losing an eye, it would have been embarrassing. Losing the right eye had symbolism involved as well. But of course, nobody would just naturally be like, it's not that big of a deal to lose a hand. It's a huge deal to lose a hand. It's a huge deal to lose an eye. Okay, so X minus 1 here, it's not like it's no big deal. You're still losing. If sin is in our lives, we're losing no matter what happens, right? Okay, so if sin is in our lives and we leave X minus 1, we leave the instrument of sin, what is it that we're going to lose instead? We're going to lose intimacy in our relationship with God. It's one of these things is going to go. Okay, it's either the sin or the relationship. And again, I'm not saying you lose your salvation and that sin cannot be forgiven, but there is a period of time between my sin and between me taking it to the Lord and reconciling in relationship with Him where that relationship is strained. And the communion doesn't flow so freely in the Spirit. I feel like I'm rejecting and I'm willfully walking away from what God is inviting me into. That's what I'm doing while I'm sinning. So yes, it does negatively impact our relationship. So we've got to choose which one's going to go. If your right hand causes you to sin, if your right eye causes you to sin. It doesn't say anybody with a right hand or a right eye needs to lose it because you might sin. But when we're struggling with a certain area of sin, and we knowingly and willfully leave the door open for access to that thing in our low moments when we desire that sin, then what we're doing is we're willfully neglecting our relationship with God. We're allowing that tension to exist. We're going to lose something. So what is it that we're going to lose? And that's why I think that radical amputation is a reasonable response to our sin. Okay, if we're going to lose one thing or the other, why not lose the thing that causes us to sin? Why not cut that thing off that is hindering our relationship with God? And Jesus is the one that suggests this here. This is His logic. This is His direction. It's better for you to eliminate the source of sin than to eliminate or hinder your relationship with God. So when I think of things that cause us to sin, so for Jesus, for this example, if it's your eye, lose it. If it's your hand, lose it. If your blank causes you to sin, cut it off. Okay, that's the equation that we're working with here. If your blank causes you to sin, cut it off. And for some people, in the theme of this passage, for some people, it's your home computer. If your home computer causes you to sin, then you should cut that thing off, right? Now imagine, Jesus says this, and somebody says, well, I have an objection. My hand is really valuable. I use it for work. I kind of like my eye. I spend a lot of time with my eye. Imagine applying that to, this computer, this is a really nice machine, and it's like $1,200 machine. I think it would be really irresponsible of me to just have to get rid of this thing that I invested in and that I purchased. I know it's causing me to sin, but it's really nice. It's multifunctional. Okay, I know that this costs a lot of money, but X minus 1 is greater then X minus 10. And if this is the source of your sin, then you should cut this thing off, right? If it's, a lot of people are gaming and they're spending time on Xbox, PlayStation, on their gaming PCs, and they are neglecting their families, they're neglecting their responsibilities. They're causing tension between them and their spouse because they're committed more to this game than they are to the building of that relationship and maintaining of that relationship. If that thing causes you to sin through neglecting responsibilities, through slothfulness, through laziness, then take that machine outside and smash it with a hammer. Okay, you know what? This would be great. You could kill two birds with one stone. You can, one, eliminate sin. You can, two, provide a youth activity for us. We can smash your devices that are causing you to sin. The kids will love it. It'll be awesome. Now think about like King Josiah in the Old Testament. He comes into power and there's idolatry everywhere. And he systematically and thoroughly eliminates the idols. He took the idols, the Asherah poles, he smashed them down, he ground them into bits, and he threw them on the ground, covered them with human bone ash. Like, this is dead, this is gone, and we are not turning back to it. We need to smash stuff with hammers. And I would love to help. Think about when the Israelites moving out of Egypt and into the Promised Land. God said, don't allow for these idolatrous cultures to remain. Drive them out. Why? Because he knows that our hearts will give themselves over to idols so quickly. We can't just knowingly and willfully allow idols, allow instruments of sin to reside in the places that we live, and expect that we're never going to fall in that way, right? So if it's your home computer, now you might say, okay, here's another objection. Well, my whole family uses it. The kids have to do online school, and it's the only word processing thing that we have. Okay, I get it. So maybe it's not the device itself that's causing you to sin, but has anybody ever lusted after Microsoft Word? No. You can keep Microsoft Word, okay? Has anybody ever had a problem with solitaire? Well, maybe some people, waste their lives on solitaire. That's a different story. Oh, and I said Xbox, and some people are like, that's right, you dang kids playing them GX boxes and all that stuff and newfangled things. If you're playing solitaire or Bejeweled on your phone, like, what makes you any different, right? Okay, there are games that adults play on their phones that are just as time-wasting as ones that teens play. So let's not be too quick to judge another. But I think another, if your blank causes you to sin, throw it out. I think that the greatest spiritual danger that we face today is this. Okay? This thing that has been very accurately described as an appendage, because it is within arm's reach at any given moment of most people's day, right? If your pants are on, your phone is within arm's reach. I guarantee it, okay? Maybe not in the bathtub, maybe not in the shower, but I promise you that thing is most likely right there at any time. Now, in youth ministry, we realize that the average teenager spends 5 to 8 hours on screens during their daytime. And imagine a different scenario. Imagine if you woke up every morning and stared at a blank two-dimensional wall approximately 1.5 feet away from your face for 8 hours. That'd be really unhealthy, right? Like it wouldn't be good for you. It wouldn't be good for your physical posture, right? It wouldn't be good for your emotional well-being. It wouldn't be good for your anxiety, your ability to relate to other people. If anybody saw another human staring at a wall for 5 hours, we would intervene and be like, something is really wrong with them. But if our two-dimensional flat surface lights up, we're like, oh, it's cool. It's still really bad, no matter what shows up on this screen, to stare at this thing for 5 hours a day. It is bad for our health. It is bad for our necks. They have a new, the text neck. Everybody's like bent now because we do this. I go to a chiropractor, and if I do this, he'll smack me in the back of the head. Text neck. Oh, sorry, sir. Yes, sir. Right? But we have words to describe the physical posture that we are creating because we stare at these things. So these are, I don't know how I got off on. I've been real big on cell phones for the last year, and the teenagers are like, can you please stop, Kyle? I get it. Okay, no, I can't because I need to hear this. But this is, I think, the biggest spiritual threat that we have because we stare at these things, which is really bad for us physically, but also it's really bad for us spiritually because we no longer wonder. We no longer sit alone with our thoughts. We no longer have boredom. You never have to be bored again because if you ever feel bored, you just whip this thing out and scroll, right? But that boredom, that aloneness, that is an essential, not the boredom part, but that aloneness is an essential part of our relationship with God. Okay, our relationship with God, I know in America it's like we go to church and we worship and we don't like all that spiritual weirdness, but like God is spirit and our relationship with him is spiritual, which means we got to sit with him and we got to close our eyes and think about him. And maybe you call it prayer, maybe you call it meditation, but we have to be alone with our God if we're going to have a relationship with our God. But we're never alone because we always have a phone, right? So that's why it's a huge spiritual threat. One, it cuts off that relationship with God because we're not really spending much time with him if we're spending too much time with this thing. But two, because of all of the evil that makes its way into us through that thing, right? There are so many threats that come through this thing. So, one, if your phone causes you to lust, cut it off. Okay, so here's just like a blanket statement. Agree or disagree, I don't care, as long as it's a little bit provocative for you. Every man should have a filter on their phone. Not because every man will lust over something that's on their phone, but because every man could be taken out in a click or a tap in a second, because that's how close it is. That's how accessible it is. And our enemy, the devil, prowls around looking for ways to devour us, and we have the door open in our pockets at every waking moment that we have it. We can be alone, we can be anywhere with this thing. I think every person I think every person should have filters on their phone so that things don't accidentally creep in. There are links, there are emails, there are websites, you misspell something, and all of a sudden there are things that you shouldn't be seeing that are arousing in us sinful lust. So we got to block that stuff out. We've got to cut that off, right? Now, I realize that not everybody struggles with lust, and this isn't just a man problem. Men look at pornography, women look at pornography. Men compare themselves to others and feel down about who they are, and women do the same thing. Satan doesn't care. As long as it leads to death, he'll hit you with whatever you'll take. Okay? So this is not one side of the aisle versus the other. This is all of us. And we need to radically amputate some of these things that are causing us to sin. But maybe if it's not lust, maybe it's the time wasting. How many people have got stuck in the YouTube black hole of never-ending scrolling? I have. My name is Kyle, and I have wasted too much time on YouTube in the past, okay? All right, the 5 biggest companies in the world. This is a little bit conspiracy theory. I don't know if I should go here, but I'm going there just for a minute. 5 biggest companies in the world are big tech. And what does big tech make money off of? Not so much the phone that they sold you. They're making money off of your attention because your attention equals dollars because that equals advertising revenue that they make. These things are nefariously designed to capture our attention. With neuroscience, with psychology, they have made a device that is intended to capture you and suck you in. This thing is created to waste your life. And when we give ourselves over to hours of binging, to endless scrolling, to mindless next, we're wasting our lives, and that is sin. I think that we as kingdom citizens have much more valuable things to be doing with our time than scrolling, right? But how much do you do that? And how much do we give ourselves to that? These things also, like you see colors and vividness and that you don't see out in nature, so our eye is directly attached to it. They will record, you get a dopamine hit every time you touch it, tactile. It is designed to chemically wrap your mind into it. Okay, so there's this cool feature that I learned about where you can turn your phone onto black and white mode because not seeing the color will make it so that it's not as attractive. I hate that feature. And Grayson knows how to turn it on. You triple click, he set up a shortcut, and he goes, Dad, your phone has been on color for too long. And I'm like, all right, turn it off. And he triple clicks, and I've got this ugly phone. The reason I hate it, because it doesn't give me the high that I'm apparently looking for. Try it. Figure it out. You can figure it out. Set your phone on black and white mode, and I guarantee you will hate it, because you're going to your phone for the hit. And when you're not getting it, it's a pain in the butt, because that's what we really want. So maybe it's not lust, but maybe it's time wasting. Maybe it's sloth, and maybe you need to set some screen limits on your phones. Maybe it's materialism. How many trips to Home Goods and Hobby Lobby have you made because of an Instagram post? How many thousands of dollars have you spent at Home Depot buying shiplap and Subway tile because Pinterest said it was awesome, right? Joanna Gaines, God love her, has caused me to spend a ton of money, all right? Because when we look at other people's lives and apparently unlimited budgets, we desire that thing, right? We want that thing. So some people are like, oh, I don't lust, that's weird. Pornography, I've never seen it, don't want to see it. Okay, well, maybe you're feeding your materialism by scrolling. And maybe you need to log out of Pinterest. Maybe you need to log out of Instagram and just move on from it from a time, because it wells up in you a desire for something that's not yours, which is essentially what lust is anyways. Whether it's a aesthetic or a person, when we desire something that's not ours, that leads to sin, right? Okay, so if I haven't got you there, maybe we'll get you on comparison. Maybe what's coming through your phone that's leading to your sin is the idea of, I wish I was that person. How many times have you looked at yourself in the mirror and been upset with what you've seen because it's not what you see on the screen? That's, God created us, and he gave us a value, and when we allow the world to assign us a value which is less than what God would have assigned us, then we're saying what he created isn't good enough. I wouldn't dare say that to God, but that's what I say about myself sometimes, right? So maybe your sin is comparison and judging yourself, or even judging others and be like, hey, I am more awesome than you, and I can't believe you think you're cool because I'm actually cool, right? Okay, so if I haven't got you with lust, time wasting, materialism, comparison, I got one more. I think we're going to cover everybody in the room if we haven't yet. If you have looked through your scroll, you scrolled through Facebook, and it's ever led you to say something like, daggum Joe Biden ruining my country and messing everything up and driving it into the ground, or, I can't believe Americans voted a psychopath into office and we actually think it's a good thing, and it's arisen in you anger, and it's arisen in you hatred, and it's arisen in you a fury and a finger pointing and a high blood pressure, then you are involved in sin too. And it may not be pornography, but it might be Fox News or CNN or somebody that ticks you off every single time you look at it. Satan doesn't care what the door is. He'll go through any one of them as long as it leads us to death. So, all right, if you have an iPhone, if you don't have an iPhone, I'm sorry, but if you have an iPhone, pull it out. We're doing phones in church today, people. All right, pull it out. Very practical way to end this sermon. Find your settings button, that little cog, right? The little wheeled gear thing, and click the settings button, okay? Now, I think it's like the 10th thing down. It should be right in front of you. There's a button towards the bottom with a purple icon with an hourglass that says screen time. Click screen time. Now, at 10 o'clock, I think, is a factory average for your phone to reset and start the new week, 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings. So if your phone looks like that and you scroll over, please work. Oh no, click it and then scroll over. It'll tell you what your average screen time was for the last week. So mine for last week was 2 hours and 40 minutes. Every day I spend 2 hours and 40 minutes looking at this thing. It's pretty fascinating. If you look through all of these, click see all activity, it'll tell you how much time was on messages, how much time was on the internet, how much time was on TikTok, how much time was on Facebook. You have access to a very detailed analysis of what you spent and how much time you spent. I can't tell you what a good number is, but what you can do is say, Lord, I spent 2 hours and 40 minutes on this thing last week. Is that okay? And if it's not, will you bring conviction? Will you show me where I need to be? Will you show me if I'm wasting my life, if I'm wasting my time, if I'm feeding myself sin? Okay, so that's step one, is to look at what's your screen time and speak to the Lord about that. But then there's another thing on this, app limits. You can set a limit, a time limit for every app that you have, okay? So if you say, I need to keep the door open for Facebook because sometimes work uses it, whatever, 20 minutes, whatever the number is, I don't care, put a limit on it. Put a limit on how long you're allowed to be on your screen. Pause, parents, a lot of you are like, yeah, I do that for my kids. Well, first of all, if you do it for your kids, why don't you do it yourself? If it's going to lead them into sin and bad habits, could it not do that for us? Second of all, sorry to ruin this for a lot of teenagers, but there's a hack you can get around it. You can tell your phone, if you only have an hour of screen time a day, you can set your phone for 11:59 p.m., and then in 1 minute, it'll change to tomorrow, and then the student can change it back to the real time, and it will reset the time limit, and then they have the same amount of time. It's essentially unlimited. So just putting a time limit on your kid's phone doesn't mean that they can't hack it. They've already found a way. Really sorry, teenagers. I just ruined it. I felt like it was better to say it like generally in front of everybody than to go to like that one kid's parent and be like, look, your kid is a hacker, okay? And then finally, there's a button there, content and privacy restrictions. You can say limit adult content to where if your phone accidentally or intentionally tries to look up something that is sexually explicit, your phone will block it. Now here's the key. You have to put a passcode in. Don't put the passcode in yourself. You know you're going to blow right past that thing in the moment. In your moment of weakness, you're just going to type it in and go for it, right? So we had, on a ski trip, we were talking about this, and one kid's like, I need to put some limits on my phone. And we're like, well, you can't put your own passcode in. He's like, okay. There's 3 adults sitting in this group. We said, hey, buddy, just hand it to one of us. We'll put in a passcode, and then you won't have access, but if you need it, of course, you can get it. And this kid looks at adult number 1, adult number 2, adult number 3, boneheaded 16-year-old next to him and goes, I'm going to let him do it. Never mind, just forget it. Just don't even try it, okay? Give it to a spouse. If you want, like Jeremy Walton, he's an elder, he's an IT guy. If you need us to put it on your phone, if you want me to walk through this thing with you, give it to a teenager, they'll figure it out for you. But we've got to cut stuff out, and it might seem extreme, and it might seem ridiculous, but X minus 1 is greater than X minus 10. And if we've got to walk around with handicap phones that don't move as quick, that are a little slower, because it's going to protect us from ruining and messing up our relationship with God, isn't it worth it? What could be more worth it? So let's not just sit here and be like, oh, that's good. Put a filter on your home. Put a filter on your computer. Covenant Eyes. We have that installed on all the youth staff's phone who volunteered to do it. Throw it on there. It's annoying sometimes. It blocks everything, but I don't need it. I especially don't need the garbage that's on there. So let's do that. So before you put your phone away, put a stinking limit on it. Cut it off. And if it's not your phone, I know we focus on that because in my opinion, the biggest spiritual threat that we have right now, it's unrestricted access to every evil and vile thing that's in the palm of my hand. But whatever it is, if blank causes you to sin, cut it off. What is God calling you to cut off? I can't tell you that. I mean, I can tell you there's certain things that you shouldn't do, but for you, I can't tell you what it is. And here's the deal. If we come before God and be like, God, I have a Nokia, and I threw out my computer, and I punched my Xbox. Are you happy with me? Remember the second point? No, I'm not happy with you. I want your heart. I don't want outward obedience. If we're cutting stuff off like this, it's for a reason. You can't get off meth if you're doing meth, right? You got to cut it off for a long time and then be restored and then be made whole again. So for a season, we cut stuff out that we're struggling with so we can restore our heart, so we can restore our relationship with God. That's what He wants. That's His desire. So we could very easily just put all the limits and still miss the heart that God desires a relationship with us. He's inviting us into a relationship. What's God calling you to cut out? And ironically, we have an opportunity to commune with God this morning. And if the men who have been asked to serve communion would please make their way forward. I remember a few communions ago, I sat in my seat thinking, I just don't know if my heart is where it should be, right? I don't know if I'm ready to commune with God because my sin was hindering my relationship with God. But I was like, but if I don't take it, I'm going to feel really weird and everybody's going to judge me. So I just took the cracker and passed it on. Just like Phil's sermon last week, if if our sin, if God brings to our minds a conviction, deal with that conviction. And maybe that's right now in your seat, okay? And 50 seconds from now when it comes by and you've dealt with it or you've committed to deal with it, you take communion and God welcomes you into his presence where his grace and love covers all that you've done. But maybe for you, you need to take this more seriously and you can let it pass. You're not missing out on salvation or something. You're not missing out on grace if you let this pass, but we're told not to take this in an attitude and a mindset that isn't right with the Lord. And if that's what God's putting on your heart today, go for it. But if you're part of that 20% who just feels the guilt and feels the shame, well, God is welcoming you into his forgiving presence. So however you need to respond today, respond. Don't leave here the same way that you came.